everybody. It's Pastor Hill here with Build Ministries. I'm just continuing in the series that I've begun where we're looking at the Bible, wealth, and money. I believe this is a very important topic just for any day, but today, especially as I believe the church is going through a transition and the whole thing about finances is going to become crucial because a lot of churches out there are struggling with how to just keep up with expenses. One thing we have to do is educate the members about money and handling money, being good stewards of what God has allowed us to receive and how He has blessed us. And so I'm continuing in this series. We're going to look at Luke chapter 14, verses 28 to 30. And I give this one a simple title, and it's basically the need for a budget. Yes, that's right. It's a dirty word for some people, but it's a necessary word. And so Luke 14, 28 to 30 says this, it says, "For which of you intending to build a tower down first and counteth the cost, whether he has sufficient to finish it, lest haply after he hath laid it and is not able to finish it, all that behold it begin to mock him, saying, This man began to build and was not able to finish." Now, first of all, we have to understand that this is something that's embedded in a greater context and is embedded in a greater context about the cost of what it really costs to become a disciple of Christ. And he uses a practical example to illustrate what it takes to become a disciple of Christ because it's a long term thing. It's not something that's immediate, but it's something that's going to be down the road. You are still wanting to be in this thing, aren't you? And so he's doing that. But one thing I said before, and I'll say it again, that with a lot of churches, they've been very good at the spiritual. I mean, praise the Lord. Thank you, Jesus, for uh, dying on a cross and raising for me, saving me from my sins, all of that stuff. But when it comes to just being really biblical, understanding what the Bible is really saying, and also understanding the practical, that is something that the church has missed. And so, what Jesus did here and what he does a lot is he brings in a practical piece that the people can understand. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to ask a question, and I'm going to go through this one, and this one's probably going to be very short. I'm just going to go through this and the basics, the highlights, the points, and you'll get it. All right, but I want to start with this question. And it's the question that he asks in verse 28. Which of you intending to build a tower sitteth not down first and counteth the cost, whether he has sufficient to finish it? I can that question just based on just knowing people. In other words, a whole lot of people sit down and make plans that involve money, but they really don't consider the long term about the plans that they're making. And I'm not talking about like going out to dinner or something. That's just a one time expense. I'm talking about those expenses that you're probably going to have to carry for a while because it's a long project. Like, for example, buying a car. There are people out there who, when they get that car because somebody said you can drive off the lot with no money down, your paycheck is your down payment or your check stub, and they get that car and 6 months later it's being repossessed, they didn't sit down and count the cost. We're talking long term here. And that's one thing that a lot of people don't really put into works in their lives, a long term plan with their money. They know that they're working and they know they're going to get paid and they know they're going to pay their bills. But there are things that people want to do and accomplish, but it's going to take planning, long term planning. In other words, you're really going to have to sit down and crunch the numbers. That's right, plan a budget. But it's not just about knowing how much money you have and what you're spending. Budgeting, if you really want to get serious with budgeting, you have to look at what you have now, what you're trying to accomplish, and take what you have and plan it out. If I'm making like $4,500 a month now, and these are all of my expenses, but I want to go on this vacation here next year, then I got to look at my expenses. How much is the vacation going to cost? So I know that how much I need to save by this point so that I can take that vacation. It takes planning. And some people, they do plan for those things, but then when it comes to bigger things, sometimes they don't really plan that well with that. And so let's say, for example, when it comes to retirement, you want to retire. There are a lot of financial planners that are saying you need to start putting money away right now so that it can grow and that this time you say you want to retire, this is what you have to do. But of course, we like to live along the way. And so we just say, we'll make this up later on the back end. No, right here, we're talking about something very serious. Look, if you're going to have this big project and it's going to cost a lot, you really have to plan this thing out. And it's not just saying that, okay, I got enough money now, so we do this every month. We'll have this much by this time and it'll be finished. And planning, you have to plan for anything that can happen, contingencies. Because if you've ever dealt with big projects, you know that things come up along the way that just kind of hit you in the budget. Those one time hits that you don't think about, but they're coming. Car repairs, car registration, medical bills, things that come along the way that just hit your budget hard. If you didn't plan for those contingencies, then that project is going to have to take a back seat. And next thing you know, you're stuck in a contingency phase and a project isn't finished. And what did Jesus say will happen? People will come along and see this project because it's not like it's a secret. People know about this and they're going to mock you. They're going to talk about you because it's stuck and you didn't finish it. And think about churches. In churches, I remember this one church, they wanted to build a building. They started to build the building. They got the shell up, and I'm driving by, going to work every day for 4 years. And for 4 years, I see the shell of a building, and it's like progress on the building stopped for over a year. And so, of course, the whole city can see that nothing's happening on this lot. And so, what happens? They started out with this plan, had the posters up and everything, and then all of a sudden it stalled for over a year. And of course, what happens? People are talking about it. And so that's what they're saying. You make a plan like that, and a lot of churches find themselves or found themselves in a position where they started with this big grand plan, but all of a sudden, somewhere along the way, it didn't transpire, or it got stalled, or it just got stopped altogether. And that becomes like it's like a black eye and a scar for that church because they put it out there. I remember there was a time when a lot of churches were in their building projects, and I would see these vacant lots and a big sign saying "Future's Home of Holy Deliverance Ministries," and years later, the sign is gone and it's still a dirt lot, or there's a Dollar Tree up on a lot or something like that, because the church had this plan and they started the plan and it didn't transpire. I remember another church where they were leasing space from another church that wasn't there, and it was a lease to own deal. And the conditions were that if they come up with $120,000 down payment, then they would go into a financial plan for the building. And so they had the terms with the owners of the building where you can spread the down payment out over 3 months. So in other words, $40,000 a month for 3 months, and once you get to 120,000, hey, you can have it. We'll sign the deed over, and you start making payments on it. Raised $40,000 first month, and when the pastor had a stroke, he was no longer able to function as a pastor. So his wife took over, but more than half the congregation left, stopped going to the church. And so this campaign to buy this building, they're $80,000 in. And it was that condition where the money you put in, if you renege on a deal, you lose that money that you put in. And so I remember they were having a prayer meeting because the deadline was upon them and they did not have that $40,000 for the third payment to get that down payment. And so they were going to pray to God that the money would come. They were going to get real spiritual about this, pour out their hearts and cry at the altar in hopes that God will miraculously give them the $40,000 that they needed to secure the building. Well, long story short, they didn't get the money. All the prayers didn't bring the 40,000. They lost the property. They lost that 80,000 that they put into it, and they wound up meeting in a room in a hotel. And I'm not sure what the fate of that ministry was after that point, but that's where they wound up. Because when it comes to doing something, you have to really count the cost, and you have to look at all the contingencies that could happen. Now, the pastor having a stroke, that's a big thing, and over half the people leaving, that's a big thing. But you have to read anything that can happen. Don't just go into something happily, not really look at, is it something that feasibly we can do over the long term? And that's the whole thing that this is saying. 29, less happily after he had laid the foundations. Like, he was going great in the beginning. I had a pastor, he said it like this: Black folk, we only plan for the weekend. White folk, they plan for years out. And when we see that, we look at, say the black churches and stuff, that's how a lot of us are functioning. So that's why they have to have fundraisers and all these different things just to get money to come in to cover expenses. And so we're saying here, you want to do something, you got to look long term, consider the cost. Number one thing you need to have is a budget. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 15 and 22 and see what it says there. First thing, Proverbs 15:22 says this: without counsel, purposes are disappointed, but in the multitude of counselors, they are established. It's good if you're going to have the project, big plans, to bounce it off people, because there are some people who have gone ahead and have done the thing that you want to do, and they can give you a whole lot of wise counsel about things to avoid so that you don't make the same mistake that they did. Because don't just think because they finished it, you can finish it too. No, listen to some wise counsel so that you can have a great understanding about how to approach this really big goal that you want to do. I want to start a business. Well, talk to some people who are in the business field, talk to some bankers so that you can know exactly what to do so that you can avoid opening a business, but then 6 months later having to close that business and losing all the money that you put. You can't get that money back. It's all gone. All right. So, number one thing, practical application, budget. Know what money you have coming in, know where it's going, and know what it's going to look like over the long term. My wife and I, we sat down, we planned out our budget. We said, over the next 12 months, this is what things should look like. Now, we know realistically it's not going to look like that, but we need to have something to reflect back onto so that when we look at the 12th year, or not 12th year, but the 12th month, and then we look at the whole year, we can then make adjustments going into the next because we know exactly or have a better idea about how the budget is going to look going forward. Am I going to make more money? Am I going to make the same amount of money? Did we pay off any debts? Did any expenses change? Can we save money by getting a better insurance policy? Things like that. Really have to plan. Kids are in college right now, getting bigger. So we really have to plan all of that stuff because sometimes you can't plan to make more money with the money that you have coming in. Because, for example, once I was laid off from my job as a teacher because of budget cuts. Didn't see it coming. I had plans because I knew I was going to make about $8,000 more the next year. Well, I went from $8,000 more to no $1,000. And so we really have to have those contingency plans. But point number two, first number point is you have to have a budget. Now, let's look at this, talk about long term. What if Noah said when he had to build an ark that this is taking too long? God told Noah, because he was 500 years old when he had his three sons, and then God told Noah to build the ark, and that you, your sons, or your wife, and your sons' wives will be saved from destruction. Well, we know that he was 500 when he got to give birth to his three sons, and so let's just assume that his sons were about 40 so when they had wives, got married, and so let's just say about maybe between 40 and 60 years. That's how long it took Noah to build the ark because and so if Noah said this is taking too long, I'm not going to finish this. We don't know what the rest of the history would have been, right? But Noah took those orders from God and he built that ark. It wasn't an overnight thing. We just think about when Noah built the ark, he did it in 3 days or something like that. No, to have all of those animals on that boat, it took a lot of work, a lot of planning to put that thing together. And so when it comes to us and our projects and money, budgeting is very important. It doesn't matter whether you make $27,000 a year or $87,000 a year. There are people who are making $27,000 a year living a whole lot better than people making 87,000 because as I learned, sometimes people who make less money are more aware of their money than people who make a lot of money, a lot more money. So you need to be aware of no matter how much money you make. Point number two, not only does it require a budget planning, it requires a discipline. Proverbs chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. Here's what it says there when it comes to discipline. Budgeting is not for the faint of heart, but if you want to have a strong heart, get your heart stronger. free, plan a budget. If you're married, plan a budget with your spouse. All right. And make sure you make love when it's all over. All right. Yeah, I said that. All right. Go to the ant, thou sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer and gathereth her food in the harvest. How long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? When wilt thou arise out of thy sleep? We're looking at the ant right here. What is the ant doing? The ant has a discipline of storing up because they know that the winter is going to come when they can't go out and pluck anything from the harvest because the harvest is done for. So, in order to not starve in the lean times, we're going to store up when things are meaty. And when it comes to when it's real good, we like to spend it. We like to go out to eat and buy things, but then all of a sudden that will dry up. And when it dries up, we forget that we had all this surplus that we just went through. We spent it, and then it stops. Now we still have our basics, but it's like all of a sudden things get real lean. Well, if you were just exercising some discipline and storing up, saving some money, when things get lean, you can still make it through. And when we're talking about storing up, I'm not talking about necessarily storing up from 1 month for the next month. I'm talking about storing up from 1 year to the next year. Because remember when Joseph interpreted the dream of the Pharaoh about the seven fat cows and the seven lean cows, you're going to have 7 years of good times followed by 7 years of famine. Store up for those 7 years of good times. In other words, take all that extra you're getting for those 7 years, store it up because they're going to be 7 years of lean where there's going to be nothing. And if they did not store up for those times when they were have plenty, they wouldn't have made it when they didn't have. Happens a lot. You know, the nation goes through recessions, even for a lot of us in our income. We're making the same amount of money. Sometimes things may change in the economy that may affect our income. And if we have nothing stored up, then we're going to struggle. They say that a lot of families, especially African American families, if we needed to come up with $2,000 in the next month because some expense came up, most of us couldn't come up with it. They say, as far as American families are concerned, most American families will have a hard time coming up with $500 in an emergency. So it is very important that we establish this thing called the budget. No matter how much money we're making, try to squirrel something away if we can. All right, because there are some people, all their money goes to all of their expenses, and I know it's hard. All right, but it also requires having a discipline. And at the same time, the third thing is you need to understand this. It comes with a sacrifice. If you want to have a long-term plan with regards to your money, you're going to have to take some immediate cuts and sacrifices. In other words, instead of eating out every week, we got to cut it back to eating out once a month. All right, instead of buying a new outfit every month, we're going to just stick with the wardrobe we have, keep it clean, keep it repaired, and only buy when there's a need to buy something. You have to take some immediate cuts in your pattern, your behavior. If you have this long-term plan to store, a lot of people are like, I want to be a millionaire. You know what? I bet if you look at the way you spend money, if you just keep working and you stop the habit of spending, 20 years from now, you could possibly be a millionaire because you're probably burning through that much money just on credit and all these other things that you're going. Just keep those things in mind because in a greater context, it's about discipleship. And discipleship costs. You're going to lose a lot when you make a decision to follow Christ. It's a sacrifice because there's an end goal that you're going for, but if you don't make it to the end, you lose that reward. So he's giving a practical thing about these projects involving money. If you're going to have these big projects, you want to get a house, you're going to take some sacrifice going with that down payment, especially if you don't want to pay the principal mortgage insurance. All right, you're going to have to take some cuts. It might take you 2 or 3 years to save up that down payment, but with the immediate sacrifice, you're looking for the long term. There's going to be a reward at the end of that thing. Plan for the contingencies as well. All right, and no matter how much money you make, to make these plans to do these great things, make the plans and do the great things. Remember that it's God who has enabled you to get the wealth. But be disciplined and have a budget. Don't make plans and have them fall through so that people can mock you. All right, because that's not good. Well, that's it. It's a practical lesson about money. Look for me next week. I'll probably come in the middle of the week just to get caught up with the series, but I want to make sure that the body of Christ is educated about this thing. So we are prepared for it. So I thank you for looking. Thank you for listening. Look forward to the next time. It's Pastor Aaron. God bless you.